Sweet Jesus, you're supposed to be dead.
The last thing I heard before the water closed over me was wicked laughter from my own so-called family. They pushed me into the ocean without a shred of pity, and the yacht sailed away, leaving me fighting and struggling to stay afloat in the middle of nowhere. I don't know how long I fought it, but it was long enough to stop feeling my hands and my feet, long enough to understand the yacht was not turning around, long enough to realize this was not a dream, long enough to come to terms with the fact that this was where I perished, and everything I was would end. It's true that life is fragile. Everything you are can disappear in the twinkle of an eye. I begged, I prayed, I shouted, I screamed. Still, the ocean took all of it and gave back nothing but cold. And then, when I had already made my peace with the end, something out there in the dark found me. If this kind of story is what you come here for, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We put out a new one every single week, and you don't want to miss where this one goes. Before I continue and tell you what, or who, found me, allow me to take you back to how I ended up being left to drown to death by the people I called family for years. My name is Octavia Toussaint, and I was not born a Toussaint. I was chosen to be one. I was 4 years old when Amos and Delia Toussaint took me out of a group home on the edge of Charleston and made me their daughter. I don't remember the home. I remember the ride away from it. I remember Amos looking at me in the rearview mirror the whole way and telling me there was a room in his house painted the exact yellow of the inside of a lemon, and that it had been waiting for me before either of us knew my name. Delia held my hand across the seat. She had the softest hands I have ever known, and she used them, in the years I got to keep her, to teach me that being loved was not a thing you had to earn by being small and quiet and grateful. She died of a slow thing in my chest of a memory when I was 9, and after that it was Amos and me, and the counting. I have to tell you about the counting, because it is the whole shape of me, and because it is the reason I am alive. When I was a child and the world got too loud, I counted. I counted the stairs. I counted the panes in the window. I counted my own breaths until the fear thinned out into something I could stand inside of. Delia understood it. She would catch me at it and take my hand and count along, quietly, so I knew I was not doing it alone. Amos understood it too, in his own way. He never told me to stop. He only ever said, "You count what matters, Tavi." Some people go their whole lives never learning what matters enough to count. Amos Toussaint built Toussaint Maritime with 2 hands and a stubbornness that outlasted every man who ever underestimated him. He started with a single tug and a least slip on the Cooper River, and by the time I was old enough to sit in the corner of his office and watch him work, he owned a stretch of the Charleston waterfront and a name that people said with weight. He moved cargo, he moved it clean, and he moved it on time. And he did it for 30 years without once cheating a man who trusted him. My father was not a soft man. He was a fair one, which is rarer and harder. He had a rule about his name, and he made it into a small ceremony every time. He signed everything by hand: contracts, checks, birthday cards, the backs of photographs. He kept a heavy black fountain pen in his breast pocket, worn smooth on the barrel from 30 years of his thumb, and he refused every stamp, every scanned signature, every convenience the modern world tried to hand him. "A man puts his own hand to his own name," he told me once, pressing the pen into my fingers so I could feel the weight of it. "Anybody can copy a stamp. A stamp is a lie waiting to happen. My name means something, because I am the only one who ever writes it." I did not understand, at 9, that he was handing me the thing that would one day save his life's work. I only understood that the pen was warm from his pocket, and that he trusted me to hold it. Renata came into our lives when I was 12. She was beautiful in a cold and finished way, like a room decorated by someone who has never once sat down in it. She had 2 children from a marriage she never spoke about. Xavier, who was 15, and already knew exactly how expensive he intended his life to be, and Bianca, who was 13, and watched everything, and said nothing, until she had calculated what it was worth. They came into the house on Legare Street with their own furniture and their own silences, and Renata began, gently, immediately, to move things. That was her way. She could not abide a thing out of its place. She straightened every crooked frame. She turned every handle to face the same direction. Within a month, she had taken down the photographs of Delia and put up her own taste. And within a year, she was wearing Delia's pearls at dinner, the long string of them Amos had given my mother on their 10th anniversary, sitting at the head of Delia's table like she had ordered the whole house from a catalog and it had finally arrived. Amos let her. He was a man who had loved once, all the way down, and I think losing Delia had hollowed a place in him that Renata was very good at appearing to fill. She was different when he traveled. That is the thing about a certain kind of cruelty. It is patient, and it is private, and it knows exactly when the witness has left the room. When Amos was on the water or on the road, the house rearranged itself around me, the same way it rearranged itself around the furniture. My plate was set last, my name was said like a chore. Xavier learned early that there was nothing he could take from me that anyone would make him give back, and Bianca learned that if she smiled while she twisted the knife, the grown-ups would only see the smile. I counted through all of it. I counted the days until Amos came home, and when he came home, everything smoothed itself back into the shape of a family, and I told myself the smoothed version was the real one. I wanted so badly for the smoothed version to be the real one. I grew up, and I stayed close to my father, and I learned his business the way you learn a language you were raised speaking, without knowing it. I could read a manifest by 15. I could read a man by 20. Amos started letting me sit in on the real conversations. The vendor rates, the port contracts, the long game of keeping a thing alive that 100 cheaper, faster, dirtier competitors wanted dead. Xavier had a title at the company by then, and an office, and no idea what happened inside the building he was paid to help run. Bianca handled what she called the family accounts, and I, the daughter who was chosen, not born, turned out to be the one who could look at my father's life's work and see how to keep it standing. Renata never forgave me for that. None of them did. In their arithmetic, the inheritance was a pie with a fixed number of slices, and every year that Amos leaned on me a little more was a year my slice grew and theirs shrank. They watched me the way you watch a rising tide come for a thing you thought was safe on the sand. Then my father got sick. It came the way the worst things come, quietly and then all at once. A tiredness he waved off, a cough that stayed, and then a diagnosis with a number attached to it, and the number was small. Amos took it the way he took everything. He made a plan. He called his lawyer. He spent 3 long afternoons behind a closed door with a stack of papers, and when he came out of the last one, he found me in the yellow room that had been mine since I was 4, and he sat down on the edge of the bed, like he used to when I was small and afraid of the dark. "I've put my affairs in order, Tavi," he said. "You don't need to know the shape of it yet. You just need to know I did it in my own hand." He took the pen out of his pocket and set it on the nightstand between us, and he looked at me for a long moment, with an expression I have spent 3 years trying to name. I think it was an apology. I think, at the very end, my father understood something about the people in his house that he had spent a decade refusing to see, and he was sorry that the protecting it would take was going to fall to me. "You remember what a stamp is," he said. "A lie waiting to happen," I said. He nodded, and he closed my hand around the pen, and he did not take it back. I moved into the house those last months, into my old yellow room, to be near him, and that is where I made my mistake, the one that put me in the water. Because being in the house meant being close to the accounts, and being close to the accounts meant I started to see. The family accounts Bianca handled had grown strange. There were payments flowing out to vendors I had never heard of, at rates my father would have thrown a man out of his office for suggesting. There were transfers routed through little sub-companies with names like Clean Laundry, arranged so they passed through every review without a single flag going up. My father was dying upstairs, and downstairs, his family had already started carving. I did what I was raised to do. I started counting. Quietly, in a notebook I kept in the lining of my bag, I wrote down every number that did not belong. I did not accuse. I did not threaten. I only watched and counted and waited to understand the whole of it before I moved, because Amos had taught me that you do not point at a leak until you can show the whole crack. Renata noticed. Of course she noticed. She noticed everything that moved out of its place, and I had moved. That is when she proposed the trip. She came to me in the yellow room on a gray afternoon, and she was gentle, and she was terrible. She said the family had been fractured too long. She said Amos would rest easier if he knew we had found our way back to each other before the end. She said there was a long weekend on the water waiting for us. The yacht, the quiet, the three of us. Just family, a chance to heal. She said it while straightening a photograph on my dresser that had not been crooked, and something under my ribs went cold and still, the way a room goes quiet the second before bad news. Every instinct I had said no. I said yes anyway. I told myself it was for Amos. The truer thing is that some starving part of me had been waiting my whole life for this family to finally mean it. And even then, even counting the numbers that damned them, I could not fully stop hoping they might. We went out on a Saturday, into a flat and oily calm that the old rivermen never trust. I should not have trusted it either. For a few hours it was almost the thing Renata had promised. Then Charleston was a low smudge on the horizon behind us, and the water went from green to gray to a deep and depthless dark, and the masks came off, one at a time, the way I should have known they would. It was Xavier who started it. He asked me, lazy and smiling, how the notebook was coming along. I did not answer. Answering would have told them how much I had. He won't last the week, Bianca said, not looking up from the rail. You know that. We all know that. And when he's gone, all of this comes home to us, to the family. Not while I'm still his heir, I said. Renata laughed then. A short, warm, awful sound. Sweetheart, she said. Nobody goes looking for an heir who drowned. And that was the moment I understood there had never been a reconciliation, and there was never going to be one. I understood it the way you understand a door closing behind you in the dark. I did not get to say anything else. Xavier's hand came flat between my shoulder blades, and the rail was gone, and there was a long, wrong second of falling, and then the Atlantic closed over my head like a door pulled shut. When I came up, the yacht was already turning, the propellers churning a white scar into the black water, growing smaller. I heard the laughter carry back to me across the dark, and then I heard the engines change pitch, and the light of them shrink, and I was alone in the middle of nowhere with the cold and the counting, and no one on earth who knew where I was. You know the rest of that night, because it is where this began. I fought. I begged. I screamed my throat raw into a sea that did not care. My body gave out before my mind would let it, and I made my peace, and I let go. And something out there in the dark found me. His name was Josiah, and he was 71 years old, and he had fished the black water off a place called Sabine Island for 50 of those years. He told me later that he had no business being that far out that night, that the current was wrong, and it was hours to first light, and a pale shape that far from land was almost never still a person. He said something leaned him onto the tiller anyway. He said when his lamp found my face, my lips were moving with no sound behind them, and it was only later, when I could speak, that he understood I had been counting. He got a hand under my arm, and he hauled a drowned woman up out of the Atlantic, and he did not let go until I was in the bottom of his boat, under every blanket he owned. I do not remember any of it. I woke up 4 days later. I woke into a small room that smelled of salt and wood smoke and something green boiling on a stove. There was a window with a curtain the color of a faded flag, and beyond it, the sound of water and gulls and, somewhere, a woman singing low. My hands did not feel like mine. My chest hurt with every breath, like it had been used as a drum. A girl of maybe 17 sat by the bed, and when she saw my eyes open she ran, and came back with the old man, and the old man looked down at me for a long moment and then said, in a voice worn smooth as his own tiller, "There she is. We wondered if you'd come back for good, or just to visit." Sabine Island was a poor place, and a beautiful one, and a long way from everything. It was one of the sea islands that the maps forget, a scatter of houses on stilts, a shrimp dock, a church with a tin roof, and a people whose grandparents' grandparents had made a whole world out of marsh and tide and stubbornness. There was no bridge. The only way on or off was the shrimp and mail boat that came, when it came, on a schedule the tide wrote and rewrote as it pleased. There was no money in my pockets, because I had no pockets. There was no phone, no card, no name anyone here would recognize. I was, for all purposes the world outside cared about, exactly as dead as my family had made me. I told Josiah and his granddaughter Ruth, only the true parts I could stand to say, that my family had done this, that I could not go back, that there was no one to call who would not simply finish the job. Josiah did not ask for more. He was a man who had learned not to go digging in a thing that clearly had teeth. He gave me the small room at the back of his house, and Ruth gave me clothes that had belonged to her mother, and the island absorbed me the way the marsh absorbs the rain, without comment, all the way down. I stayed because I had no choice. And then, after a while, I stayed, because I could not think of a reason to leave that wasn't a reason to die. I want to tell you about those months, because they made me into the woman who came back. I could not fish. My chest would not let me, that first while. But I could do the thing Josiah's hands were too old for. I learned to gut and clean and pack the catch. I learned to run the little folding table at the edge of the dock on the mornings the mailboat brought day trippers and buyers from the bigger islands, and to sell what Josiah pulled from the water. I learned the names of everyone in that scatter of stilt houses, and they learned mine, or the half of it I gave them. Tavi, I said. Just Tavi. A name my father had used for the child he chose. It felt like the only thing I had carried out of the sea that was still mine. And I counted. Lord, I counted. I counted nets, and I counted the tide tables, and I counted the days, and the counting, which had been the shape of my fear for 25 years, began, slowly, out there where nothing could touch me, to turn into something else. Out there it became a discipline. It became the way I put a spine back into a body that had been thrown away. Every morning I counted the catch and made it come out right. Every evening I sat on the dock and counted the lights coming on across the water and did not cry, most nights, and the not crying was a kind of muscle I was building. I stopped waiting for a boat to take me home. That was the day I truly survived, the day I stopped being a woman, waiting to be rescued, and started being a woman, deciding what to do with the fact that no one was coming. I made my peace with Sabine Island. I decided it could be a life. I told myself the girl who had begged the ocean was gone, and good riddance, and I meant it. I was wrong that she was gone. But she was not the one who came back. It was a woman named Odessa who cracked the whole thing open, on an ordinary Tuesday at my folding table on the dock. She came off the mailboat with a group of buyers from Edisto, an older woman in a good coat that had seen better years, and she stopped in front of my table to look at the shrimp, and then she looked up at my face, and every drop of color went out of hers. She put a hand flat on the table like the ground had moved. "Sweet Jesus," she said, "you're supposed to be dead." Miss Odessa Stearns had kept the Toussaint house on Legary Street for 19 years. She had known me since I was the 4-year-old in the lemon-yellow room. She had been one of the only people in that house who had ever counted along with me, quietly, so I would not be alone. And she did not work for the family anymore, because she could not stomach what the family had become. I took her back to Josiah's, and I sat her at the little table, and she told me everything, and every word was a stone. My father was dead. He had died 3 days after I went into the water, in his own bed, believing, because they told him so, that his chosen daughter had stolen from him and run. That was the cruelest part, the part I still cannot count my way past. They had let him die thinking I had betrayed him, but Amos Toussaint had put his affairs in order in his own hand, months before, and he had left everything, the company, the waterfront, the name, to me, to Octavia. Every share, every slip, every dollar, hand-signed with that heavy black pen. And there was the trap they had built for themselves without meaning to, and the trap I would spend 3 years learning to spring. Because I was the sole heir, the estate legally belonged to a woman the whole world believed had drowned. The family could not simply take it. It was mine, dead or alive. So they had gone to work. They had a lawyer draft the papers to have me declared dead, not lost, not missing, but legally, permanently dead, which would let the estate pass to Renata as the surviving widow, and from her, quietly, to Xavier and Bianca. To grease it and to explain me away, they had put out the story my father died believing, that I had stolen and fled, and they had produced documents to prove it. Documents with my father's signature on them, stamped, scanned. A signature Amos Toussaint had never once in 30 years allowed near his own name. Miss Odessa did not know that part mattered, but I did. I sat in Josiah's kitchen with my dead mother's dead friend across the table, and I felt the old man's voice come up through 3 years of salt water. A stamp is a lie waiting to happen. They had forged my father to rob me, and in doing it, they had left the one fingerprint that could hang them, because anyone who had ever done business with Amos knew he would sooner cut off his hand than let a stamp write his name. Odessa told me the rest. Xavier was running Toussaint Maritime, which meant Xavier was killing it. The contracts my father had spent 30 years keeping were leaving one by one. The old crews were being let go. And the money that should have been holding it all together was going out the door as fast as they could carry it. Renata redoing the house on Lagare for the 3rd time, Xavier collecting cars the way a child collects stones, Bianca moving numbers around to keep the whole rotten structure standing just long enough for the death declaration to clear. They were burning my father's life's work for warmth, and there was no one left inside those walls with the standing to stop them, or the courage. There was one person, Odessa said. There had been a man coming around, an investigator, something about the estate, about the paperwork, about a case his own bosses kept telling him to close. He would not close it. He came back, on his own time, on his own dime, asking questions nobody wanted asked. And the reason his bosses wanted it buried, Odessa said, lowering her voice, even in that safe kitchen, 3 islands from anyone who could hear, was that his bosses had been bought. The rot was not only in my family. It had reached up into the offices that were supposed to catch a thing like this. My family had money, and money in Charleston bought protection, and the protection went higher than 3 greedy people carving up a dead man. I understood then that I could not just come back. If I walked into Charleston and said my name, I would not last a week. Renata had told me the truth on that yacht without meaning it as a truth. Nobody goes looking for an heir who drowned, and nobody would blink when one turned up dead a 2nd time. The people who could arrest my family were on my family's payroll, so I would not come back. Not as myself, not yet. Not until I had built a thing they could not bury with money or muscle or a bought judge. I looked at Odessa across that table, and I heard my own voice come out flat and certain, in a way it had never been before I went into the water. Then we don't come back, I said. Not until it's built so tight there's no way out. Not for one of them. That was the day the drowned girl finally died, and the counter took her place. The investigator's name was Desmond Nash, and before I let him anywhere near me, Odessa had to make sure of him. Because a man who keeps a case open against orders is either the most honest man in the county, or a hook with very good bait on it, and there is no way to tell them apart from the outside. Odessa tested him the way you test ice before you trust it with your weight. She went back to Charleston and let it be known, carefully, in the places Nash listened, that a woman who used to keep the Toussaint house had heard something. Nothing much, just a whisper that the daughter might not have died the way they said. Then she watched what he did with it. If he was bought, the whisper would go straight up the chain to Renata, and men would come for Odessa within the week. If he was real, he would do what an honest man with no backup does. He would come to her alone, quietly, and he would protect her. He came alone. He came at night, on foot, and he asked her only whether she was safe, and whether she had anyone who could get her out of the city if she needed. He never told a soul she had spoken to him. Miss Odessa Stearns, who had watched people her whole life, and been paid to see nothing, came back to Sabine Island and told me the ice would hold. I will not pretend the 3 years were fast or clean or anything but grinding. This is where the story a lesser telling would rush, and I am not going to rush it, because the grinding is the whole point. Because what my family never understood is that patience is a kind of wealth, and I had nothing else to spend. We built it a piece at a time. Nash could only come to the island rarely. The mailboat kept its own counsel, and a man asking about a dead heiress could not be seen taking that boat too often. So most of it happened at a distance, in letters that said nothing to anyone who might read them, in numbers I sent out, and numbers that came back. Odessa was our eyes inside Charleston, until they started watching her too closely, and she had to go still for months at a stretch. And those were the hardest months, the silent ones, when I did not know if the whole thing had been discovered, and I was simply waiting for the water again. And I counted everything. From a fishing island with no money and no name, I built a ledger of my family's greed more complete than any they kept themselves. Every car Xavier bought, I logged. Every renovation, every transfer, every vendor with a laundry clean name, I logged. Nash worked the parts I could not reach. The filings, the forged documents, the paper trail of the death declaration crawling through a system his own bosses were paid to keep from noticing. And slowly, between us, the picture came clear, and it was bigger than my family. Nash mapped it upward, from Bianca's clean laundry companies to the lawyers who drafted the death papers, to the office of a man named Director Falk, who signed off on the things that were supposed to be checked, and who had, in the same 18 months, come into a lifestyle a public servant's salary does not explain. The key to all of it, the thing that turned a mountain of suspicion into a blade, was the smallest thing: the forgeries. Every document they had used to rob me, and to end me on paper, carried my father's stamped signature, the one lie he would never have told. I had the pen. I had 30 years of Amos Toussaint's hand-signed name in contracts and letters, and the backs of photographs, to prove what his real signature looked like, and what it never looked like. And I had, waiting in a safe deposit box 100 miles from anyone who wanted it burned, the true will, the last thing my father ever wrote in his own hand, leaving everything to the daughter he chose. By the end of the 3rd year, we had it. Proof of life, in the flesh, the true will. A forgery trail with my father's stolen name on every page, and the map of every bought official who had helped them do it. We had it built so tight, there was no way out. There was only one thing left. I had to be alive somewhere they could not make me disappear. Somewhere with too many eyes, too many records, too far above Falk's reach for money to reach after me. And that was when it nearly all died. They found the thread. 3 years of care, and it came apart in a week, the way these things do. A young man in the office that held the case had been on Falk's payroll the whole time, and he caught the shape of what Nash was doing before we were ready to move. Falk's people acted fast. They came for Nash's files in the dark and took everything they could carry, and when Nash tried to hold on to one drive, they put him against a door frame hard enough to need stitches over his eye. They pulled Odessa in for questioning on a charge they invented that same afternoon: harboring, obstruction, and held her, an old woman, in a room for a day and a half. And word came back to the island, carried on the mailboat by a face I did not know, that if the drowned Toussaint girl was truly alive out there in the marsh, the people who had sheltered her would answer for it. Josiah, Ruth, a whole island of poor and decent people who had asked me for nothing. And the death declaration, the paper that would make my family's theft permanent and legal, was finally, after 3 slow years, about to clear. I sat on Josiah's dock the night I learned all of it, and I counted the lights across the water, and for the first time since the sea gave me back, I could not make the counting hold. I had built the thing so carefully, and now they had the files, and they had Odessa, and they had a threat against the only people who had ever taken me in for free, and the clock had almost run out. It looked, that night, like the ocean had only been slow about finishing me. But they did not get everything. That is the thing about people who have always won with money. They believe money is the only place a thing can be kept. They took Nash's files. They did not have the true will, sealed in a box they did not know existed. They did not have the pen. And they did not have the one door I had built the whole plan around. A clean one, high above Falk. An office Nash had chosen precisely because it did not answer to anyone in Charleston who could be bought. Before the raid, Nash had done the one thing that mattered. He had already sent the core of it, the forgery analysis, the network map, the proof that a public office had been purchased, to a contact he trusted from years before, in a place my family's money did not reach, and they did not have me. I took the mailboat off Sabine Island on a clear, cold morning, with Josiah standing at the end of the dock, not waving, just watching, the way he had watched the water the night he pulled me out of it. I had a bag and a sealed box collected on the way, and a pen worn smooth by my father's thumb, and 3 years of counting folded up inside me like a loaded spring. I did not feel afraid. I want you to understand that. I had already done the dying. There was nothing left in Charleston that could do to me what the ocean had already tried and failed to finish. They had scheduled a thing at the company, a small ceremony, the kind of thing my family loved. The formal reading of the death declaration, and the board's blessing on the transfer of Toussaint Maritime, once and for all, into Renata's hands. It was to be held in the boardroom on the top floor of my father's building, the one with the long table Delia used to say was too big for any honest conversation. Under the tall windows that look out over the harbor Amos spent his life on. They had chosen the one room they were most sure they controlled. They should not have chosen a room with so many windows and so many witnesses. But then, they had never once imagined the daughter they drowned would be standing in the doorway. I walked into the Toussaint Maritime building on a Thursday morning with Desmond Nash beside me, a bandage still over his eye, and a woman from the clean office he had chosen, the one above Falk, walking a half step behind us with a case full of everything we had built. The receptionist at the front desk had been told for 3 years that I was dead. When she looked up and saw my face, she did not scream. She simply stopped breathing, the way a room stops when something impossible walks in wearing a face it has already grieved. We rode up in silence. I counted the floors. When the doors opened, I could hear them through the boardroom glass, the low, comfortable murmur of people who believe they have already won and are only waiting on the paperwork. I opened the door. I have played the next few seconds in my mind more times than I can count, and I am going to give them to you slowly, because I earned them slowly. The talking stopped, all at once, the way it does. Renata was at the head of my father's table, in my father's chair, wearing Delia's pearls, and she came half out of her seat before her body knew why. Xavier was beside her, and whatever crossed his face went through 3 shapes before it settled into the stillness that comes right before a man gets loud. Bianca dropped her pen. She had spent 3 years handling the money that would end her, and she dropped her pen on the table when she saw me, and the little sound of it was the loudest thing in the room. There were others at that table, 2 of my father's old managers, who did not know whether to be confused or hopeful. A lawyer I did not recognize, and there was Director Falk himself, come to bless the transfer in person, which was a piece of arrogance I would later be very grateful for, because it put him in the room, on the record, on the day it all came apart. "Octavia," Renata said, and her voice reached for its old flat certainty, and did not quite find it. "This isn't, sit down, Renata," I said, and she did. In my father's chair, wearing my mother's pearls, my stepmother sat down because I told her to, and I watched her understand that the ground she had stood on for 3 years had never been ground at all. I did not shout. I had learned, out on the water, that the loudest thing in any room is the person who has stopped needing to raise their voice. I told them, plainly, what was about to happen, and then I let the woman from the clean office and Desmond Nash make it happen, because I wanted it on the record, in hands that could not be bought. They laid it out piece by piece, the way you build anything that has to hold. First, that I was alive, verifiably, provably, standing in the room alive, which by itself made the death declaration they had come to celebrate a dead letter, and every transfer built on it worthless. Then, the will. My father's true and final will, hand-signed in that heavy black ink, leaving all of it to me. Then, laid beside it, the documents my family had used to rob me and to bury me, every one of them carrying Amos Toussaint's stamped, scanned, forged signature, a signature the man had refused for 30 years. I put my father's pen on the table where everyone could see it, and I let the woman from the clean office explain, in words no jury would struggle with, what it meant that a man who never in his life let a stamp near his name had apparently signed away his daughter with one. And then Nash opened the part that reached higher than my family. The clean laundry companies, the bought lawyers, the 18 months in which a public office had been quietly purchased to make sure none of it was ever checked. He said the name Falk, and I watched the director's face do the thing that Renata's control could not do. I watched it lose its shape entirely. Because here is the gift Renata never understood she had given me. She could not abide a thing out of its place. For 3 years, while she thought she was hiding, she was keeping records, neat, precise, immaculate, every transfer in its row, every payment filed and squared. She had built the tidiest paper trail I have ever seen, and she had built it straight to her own door, because a woman who cannot leave a crooked frame on the wall cannot leave a loose end in a ledger either. Her order, the thing that had made the house on Ligare so cold, was the very thing that hung them all. We did not have to prove the mess. We only had to follow how carefully she had kept it. It came apart fast after that. It always does, once the first honest hand touches it. Falk tried to speak and was told, gently, by the woman from the clean office, that he would have his chance to speak, and where. Xavier got loud, the way I knew he would, about theft and about what our father would have thought, and I let him, because there was no version of that morning where volume was going to save him. The lawyer I did not recognize gathered his things and left, which told me everything about how much he had actually believed in his clients. My father's 2 old managers looked at me across that long table, and one of them, a man named Cyrus who had worked the docks since before I was adopted, put his weathered hand flat on the wood and said, quietly, "Welcome home, Miss Toussaint." He had been holding that name for me for 3 years. I had to look out the tall windows at the harbor for a moment before I could answer him. My family was removed from the company that same morning. Xavier from the office he never understood. Bianca from the accounts she had used to help kill it. The death declaration was void the instant I stood breathing in the doorway, and the estate, the waterfront, the name, all of it, was mine, because it had always been mine, hand-signed and warm from my father's pocket. The larger thing, the network, the bought offices, the director who had put a public trust up for sale, that went where it needed to go, into hands above Charleston that Falk's money could not reach, and it was no longer mine to carry. I had spent 3 years building it. Setting it down felt like putting down a stone I had forgotten was heavy. There was one conversation left. There is always one conversation left. I found Renata alone, after the others had been walked out, at the far end of the boardroom by the tall windows. She had not run. I will give her that. She stood looking out at the harbor with her back straight and Delia's pearls at her throat. And when she heard me, she turned, and for once there was nothing arranged about her face. "You were never going to let it go," she said. It was not quite an accusation. It was closer to wonder. "No," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said the thing she had been saying to me, in one form or another, since I was 12 years old. "You were never really one of us." And even now, even beaten, she meant it as the deepest cut she had. It was the only knife she had ever known how to hold. I had spent 3 years on a fishing island, learning what to say to her, and in the end, I did not need any of it. I only told her the truth. "No," I said again. "I wasn't one of you. My father chose me. He didn't have to, and he did, and he was right." I looked at the pearls at her throat, my mother's pearls, and I did not ask for them back, because I understood, finally, that they had never been the thing worth having. You spent your whole life sure that being born into a thing was the same as belonging to it. It isn't. You were his wife, and you were her children, and not one of you belonged to a single thing he built, because none of you ever loved it. I did. That's the whole difference. That's all it ever was. She did not answer. There was nothing left in her to answer with. I left her standing at the window in my father's boardroom, and I did not look back, because I had already spent enough of my life waiting on that woman to become something she was never going to be. I kept the company. I did not rename it. Toussaint Maritime is my father's name, in my father's hand, and I intend to keep it standing long enough that the docks he built forget there was ever a year they nearly went dark. I brought back the old crews Xavier had let go. I kept my father's rule, and I keep his pen in my own breast pocket now, and I sign everything by hand, because a stamp is a lie waiting to happen, and my name means something because I am the only one who writes it. Miss Odessa runs my house on Ligare Street now, not as a keeper but as family, which is what she always was. The photographs of Delia are back on the walls. Desmond Nash healed up over that eye, and took a job he could finally do, without watching his own back, and I owe him more than I will ever be able to sign over. And every few months, when the water is calm and the tide agrees, I take a boat out to Sabine Island, and I sit on Josiah's dock, and the old man and I count the lights coming on across the marsh, the way I taught myself to do on the nights I was learning how to live. Ruth is at college now, on the mainland, on my dime, and glad to take it. The island took me in when I was nothing and nobody, and less than that, and I will be paying that debt, gladly, for the rest of my life. People ask me sometimes if I forgive them. It's the wrong question, and I have stopped trying to make it into the right one. I don't spend my days on Renata, or Xavier, or Bianca. Hating them would mean carrying them, and I already carried them across an ocean once. What I know is simpler than forgiveness, and harder to take from me. My family threw me into the sea to steal a thing my father built, and they did it because they never once believed I was really one of them. They were right about that. I wasn't born a Toussaint, I was chosen to be one. And in the end, that turned out to be the stronger thing, the way my father always said it was. If you made it all the way to the end of this one, then you already understand why I told it. Do me a kindness. Leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. And if this story meant something to you, share it with one person who needs to hear that the people who leave you for dead have already told you exactly how much they underestimated you. Subscribe and stay with me. There's another one coming next week, and I promise you, you don't want to miss where it goes.